Shalom. This week we are reading Parashat Noach. And we haven't even discussed yet together Parashat Bereshit because of the complicated holiday schedule. Last week, short week, we didn't get a chance to discuss the first Torah portion, Bereshit, and already this week we're reading Noach. And so much has happened that we find ourselves completely overwhelmed by the massive sweep of time. And it's just larger than life. It encompasses so many generations, 10 generations from the very beginning of creation till the generation of the flood, and the incredible force of movement and life throughout these Torah portions. So now we're kind of late getting onto the train, and we have missed something here. We've missed the progression of creation, some element of disappointment. Now coming to the point where there's already regret being expressed. But yet, this is the situation, it is what it is. And here we are, starting as it were, in the middle. But how can we understand this incredible sweep of events? Creation started off with so much promise. But then, at the end of last week, end of Parashat Bereshit, we read in Genesis chapter 6 and verse 5, Hashem saw that the wickedness of man was great upon the earth, and that every product of the thoughts of his heart was but evil always. And Hashem reconsidered having made man on earth, and he had heartfelt sadness. And Hashem said, I will blot out man whom I created from the face of the ground, from man to animal, to creeping things, and to birds of the sky, for I have reconsidered my having made them. But Noach found grace in the eyes of Hashem. So, first of all, what was really happening here? I mean, what really was the malady of man that God was so irreconcilable to him, that the die had been cast to such an extreme as for God himself, as it were? And how can we understand this? That's something else altogether. For God to express regret at having created him. So what do I know? I've heard that man was reduced to all sorts of manipulative, cynical, using special interest groups, and that he was really kind of just treacherously squeezing out of creation all sorts of self-serving poses. But more about that momentarily. In the meantime, man brought this terrible decree upon himself. But what did all of creation do? I mean, a decree seems to have been against man. Hashem saw that the wickedness of man was great upon the earth, and that every product of the thoughts of his heart was but evil always. But then the next thing that we know, and Hashem reconsidered having made man on earth and had heartfelt sadness, and Hashem said, I will blot out man, whom I created from the face of the ground, from man to animal, to creeping things, and to birds of the sky, for I have reconsidered my having made them. So this is an environmentalist's nightmare, and really recalls the very long-standing and deep-running issue of man's position, responsibility for this world. But again, the sweep is the only word I can think of to describe the momentum and the way that this whole process of decay has overtaken us from the very beginning of, after all, last week's Torah portion. If I had to sum it up, the only way I can really understand what's happened here, let's look at an arc of total misappropriation and misuse and missed opportunity and destruction that man brought upon himself and upon the world. Joni Mitchell, Big Yellow Taxi, 1970, seems to have caught it all when she wrote, don't it always seem to go that you don't know what you've got till it's gone. They pave paradise and put up a parking lot. So, it's an environmentalist nightmare, this whole sequence of events. Man, if he is responsible for creation, brought this upon the world, this decree of destruction. So on the one hand, we're told back in Genesis chapter 1 and verse 28 that God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, and rule over the fish of the sea, the bird of the sky, and every living thing that moves on the earth." Man is put into some sort of position of dominance, and man is told to rule the world. But yet, on the other hand, in chapter 2 of last week's Torah portion, Bereshit, and verse 5, we're told, "Now all the trees of the field were not yet on the earth, and all the herb of the field had not yet sprouted, for Hashem God had not sent rain upon the earth, and there was no man to work the soil." So if God created all of the vegetation, where was it? The verse is telling us that it was locked in the earth in potential, and God was waiting for man to work the soil. Our sages have a beautiful tradition about the meaning of these words, that there was no man to ask for rain, that man was to pray for rain. Man was to be the catalyst to bring forth the potential of the vegetation of the earth. So here already we see a dichotomy. We see that man, on the one hand, was given over to subdue the earth, but on the other hand, he is the one who is the linchpin in the whole sequence. He is the one who is responsible for seeing to it that creation indeed blossoms and brings forth its fruit, and there was no man yet to ask. So the issue of man's involvement with and responsibility for the environment seems to be a key to understanding the sequence of events, the sweep again of the incredible saga of the downward spiral of man, and in so his own downfall, also his taking along with him all of creation to the point of the decree of destruction with which our parsha begins. So how do we define this responsibility and this issue of man's ultimate environmentalism? Now, if you watch television during the 1970s, at any point you would have seen America's most famous Indian, who was actually not an Indian at all, but an Italian-American, Iron Eyes Cody, who was best known for the best known public service announcement of all time. It was originally launched by Keep America Beautiful on Earth Day, 1971. You see this Indian paddling this canoe down a river to booming drum beats, and he glides past a lot of garbage in the river, and the music grows, and the Indian pulls his boat onto the bank of a stream that's full of litter. He gazes up on the freeway, and a voice intones, "Some people have a deep, abiding respect for the natural beauty that was once this country, and some people don't." And on those words, someone flings a bag of trash from a passing car, and it scatters at the Indian's feet. He looks into the camera, and a single tear rolls down his cheek, and he declares, or the narrator declares, "People start pollution. People can stop it." And if you missed the 1970s, you can still catch this on YouTube. Now, the question really is, what happened here? Between Parashat Bereshit and Parashat Noach, as 10 generations fly by, and by that time we're up to the generation of the flood, and the die had been cast, and this decree of doom was made not only against man, but against all of creation. It was sealed. Why? what really was responsible for it? Was it litter? Our sages teach us that it was sexual immorality, and that by the time of the decree against the generation of the flood, man had reached such a low that there were actually marriage ceremonies that were conducted replete with marriage contracts between men, as well as between men and animals, our sages tell us. Additionally, we are taught that all of creation, all of the animals, became degraded and copulated with other species. So there was some sort of asymmetry that had been cast into the matrix, and all of humanity became befuddled. And this was manifest in this total lawlessness and abandonment in the area of morality. Our sages tell us that this is what sealed the fate of creation. And here again, this might explain why we find that all of creation was deserving of destruction, but still it remains for us to understand, how did matters get to this point? The implication is that because man fell from his lofty stature, from the divine image in which he was created in Parashat Bereshit, the implication is that because he fell, all of creation fell. But still, the question remains, what is the connection between the nature, the character, the conduct of man and the spiritual stature of all of creation? And this is actually one of the secrets that we learn about in last week's Torah portion, Parashat Bereshit. It's reflected in chapter 1 and verse 26, where we read famously, and God said, "Let us make man in our image, in our likeness. They shall rule over the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and over the animal, the whole earth, and every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth." And this verse is in the plural, let us make man. And there are many issues that have arisen from this strange thing. I mean, every moron knows that there's only one God. So what's the idea here? Let us make man. And most famously, our sages tell us that this is the Torah's ultimate opening lesson in humility. That God spoke this way as if he were taking counsel with the angels, something completely unnecessary, but as if he was not going to make this decision on his own, and so he deigned to take counsel with those lower than himself, not that they have any authority, but let us make man, the royal we, a symbol of humility. But that's actually only one interpretation. There's another very beautiful, equally compelling and fascinating tradition regarding these words, let us make man, and that is those sages who teach that God was actually addressing all of creation. He was addressing the creation that he had already brought forth, addressing those elements where in this verse he says that man will have dominion over them, addressing the animals, addressing the birds, addressing the fish, and saying to creation together, let's now make man because you will be included in him, in his soul, because you will have a portion together with man, because man's massive, powerful, collective soul will encompass your forces as well. And therefore God said to the other elements of creation, come, be part of man, because he will be at the center, he will be the key to your survival and growth. He will bring you up, and he could also bring you down. Let us make man. Come, be part of this project, which is the main reason why I brought you all into being in the first place, because man will be the key to the universe. And of course, as we've spoken about in the past, this is a very profound, basic, fundamental, mystical concept that the sages discuss. There is an idea expressed in the ancient prayer called Perek Shira, chapter of song, which is recited by pious Jews every morning that contains the song of praise that is sung to the Master of the universe, to God, by every element of creation, by every animal, by every species, and that these aspects of creation, we are taught, cannot themselves sing their song of praise to the Almighty in the morning at dawn until first man sings the song, because man includes all of creation. So, if this is the case, Na'aseh Adam, let us make man, let us, creation, be included in man, then this is actually a new dimension, a new understanding, a secret that the Torah wishes to share with us regarding what environmentalism, which again is the key here, because it's the key to understanding Parshiot, Bereshit, and Noach for us today. This is a different level of environmentalism than Iron Eyes Cody, the crying Indian, and the litter in the river and along the highway. This secret of environmentalism teaches that man is the key, the guardian, the gardener, and that it's not only about picking up the litter and the trash, it's about man picking up the litter and the trash within himself in order to better all of creation, and that's why creation fell. And that's why the Torah is telling us creation was deserving of obliteration, and that's why creation itself ran amok, which is unthinkable. This cannot just be anecdotal, some whimsical tale that the rabbis are telling us, that the animals all ran off with each other and cross-copulated between species. What is that? Where would that come from? The idea is that there is an inexorable bond between man's spiritual stature and the prolonged effect that he's going to have on his environment, because the stamp that's made on his surroundings is made from himself. And actually, even more beautifully, we see this secret again in another verse, and it's quite profound, and it's actually quite explicit in Genesis chapter 2 and verse 15. We read these words: Hashem, God, took the man and placed him in the Garden of Eden to work it and to guard it. That's Vayikach Hashem Elokim et ha'adam vayinichehu began Eden la'avda u'l'shamra, to work it and to guard it. So, of course, like many other verses in the Torah, like the one that we cited just previously regarding Na'aseh, let us make man, there are so many different ways of understanding these verses. There are so many different levels of truth which are all true. So one way of understanding these words, that Hashem placed man there to work it and to guard it. He placed him in the Garden of Eden to work it and to guard it. One level of understanding is that he placed him there to work the land, le'avda. But another level of understanding is that he placed him there, la'avda, to serve it, to serve the land, to be the servant of the land, and to guard it. And the last verse the last word of that verse seems to show a preference to this interpretation. To serve it, to be its servant and to guard it. It's his responsibility. So, perhaps this was part of the secret of Noah's righteousness, because we do learn at the end of Parashat Bereshit, we learn towards the end that Lamech years and begot a son, and he called his name Noach, saying, this one will bring us rest from our work and from the toil of our hands, from the ground which Hashem had cursed. And it's well known and understood that the ground had been cursed since the sin of Adam and Chava, and as the verses testify, his toil was met with weeds and brambles. The ground had been cursed, but Noach, our sages tell us, implemented farming tools. It's a very interesting midrash. This too, is this whimsical? Is this anecdotal? Are our sages telling us a tall tale or a child's fireside tale that Noach is the one who invented farming tools? And this is why he was called Noach, because he gave respite. As the verse that we just read tells us, he brings us rest from our work. It's not just that he created the plow, it's that he took an interest, he took an active role. He was careful to show respect to the earth. He was looking for a symbiotic relationship. He cared for the earth, and this was his very righteousness. So he took responsibility and had a good relationship with the environment around him because he was righteous. And thus, no wonder it was he who was chosen to be the one to save all of creation. And compare man's horrible attitude and attributes that we understand was the hallmark of the generation of the flood, bestiality. Compare this to what we learn about Noach. Our sages tell us that on the ark, Noach did not sleep for an entire year. He was so completely dedicated to feeding the animals. There were those that had to be fed at 2 in the morning. There were those that had to be fed at 3 in the morning. There were those that had to be fed at 4 in the morning. And all he did constantly was seek the betterment of all of the tenants of the ark. This drove him nearly insane. All he did constantly was feed the animals around the clock. And there's an anecdote that's related about a little lizard, a particular breed of lizard on the ark, that Noach was just losing his mind over this lizard because it wouldn't eat anything. He couldn't find anything that this lizard would like. One day, the sages tell us, Noach was quartering a pomegranate, and out from the pomegranate, a little worm fell out, and the lizard immediately ate that worm. And now Noach understood what this lizard eats. And so Noach went and made a pile of fruit to rot so that he would be able to keep a steady supply of these worms for this particular lizard. What is this all about? What are we learning here when our sages bother to record this kind of anecdote? These are keys, huge principles, huge psychological and spiritual lessons for us to understand the background of what's going on here. Noach was a person who looked at creation and said, this is my responsibility. I am the servant of the world. And that's why the earlier generations, our sages tell us, as the verse explains, were not given over to eat meat. Adam was not given the right to eat meat. But because Noach had made a spiritual acquisition, because he cared so deeply for all of creation, he would be compassionate. It was the opposite of how animals are raised today, for example, by the meat industry for a lustful consumerism that has no regard or respect for the sanctity of life. Noach, because he was so caring and so compassionate, he deserved to be able to also eat animals for his own benefit, because it was understood that his relationship with those animals would be one of compassion and one of total dedication. Because his attitude was, how can I serve you and nurture for you, not as was the attitude of earlier man who had brought down all of creation through his own lust and desire for immediate gratification. His attitude was not, what can you do for me and for my immediate and horrific twisted desire. So there are great lessons to be learned from Parashat Bereshit, from Parashat Noach, and from the sequence of events between Bereshit and Noach regarding our responsibility as human beings towards the world around us, because to serve it and to guard it is indeed the call of humanity. And to end, again, with the words of Joni Mitchell, this time 1969, Woodstock, we are stardust, we are golden, and we've got to get ourselves back to the garden.